Evening, ladies and gentlemen, councillors and officers and those who are viewing. Welcome to East Gippsland Shire's council meeting of today, the 29th of November 2022. East Gippsland Shire Council live streams, records and publishes its meetings via webcasting. These recordings are available for viewing by the public. During the meeting, any members of the public who are addressing the council will have their image and comments recorded. No other person has the right to record council meetings unless approval has been granted by the chair, and that would be me tonight or whoever's acting in this place. In line with the Local Government Act 2020, councillors are able to attend council meetings electronically or in person, and the meetings will be open to the public via live streaming. Members of the public are invited to view the live stream council meeting following the link on the council's website or the Facebook page. If council encounters difficulty tonight with the live streaming during the meeting, we will adjourn until the issue is resolved. If technical issues can't be resolved, the meeting may be postponed until a later time or date. Councillors and those who are with us, East Gippsland Shire Council acknowledges the Gunai Kurnai, Monero and Bidawal people as the traditional custodians of the land and waters that encompass East Gippsland Shire and their enduring relationship with country. The traditional custodians have cared and nurtured East Gippsland for tens of thousands of years. Council value their living culture and practices and their right to self-determination. Council pays respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people living in East Gippsland, their elders, past, present and future. Councillors, a member's attendance can only be recorded as present at a council meeting when the member can confirm they meet all of these three criteria. They can hear the proceedings, they can see other members in attendance and be seen by others, and they can speak, they can be heard to speak. I'll now confirm with councillors Uri and Buckley that they can see, hear and be heard by each other, and to note assurance from each that the location they're participating from is secure to ensure confidential deliberations remain confidential. Councillor Uri, can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can, Mayor.
Terrific. Can you confirm that the location you're participating from is secure to ensure confidential items are dealt with in a confidential manner?
Yes, I can confirm that, Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Uri. Councillor Buckley, can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can.
Can you confirm that the location you're participating from is secure to ensure confidential items are dealt with in a confidential manner?
Indeed it is.
Great. Thank you, councillors. Councillors, we have one apology, Councillor Stowe. Item 1.3, councillors, officers, are there any declarations of conflict of interest? None are noted. I need to confirm at item 1.4, confirm the minutes of the meeting, the statutory meeting and council meeting held on 8th of November 2022 can be confirmed. Do I have a mover? Councillor Crook, Councillor Allen. Councillor Crook, do you need to speak to the item?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Allen.
No, thank you, Mayor.
Terrific. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Thank you, councillors. We'll confirm the minutes of those meetings. All those in favour? Thank you. Carried unanimously. No, sorry, not unanimously. Councillor Buckley wasn't there, so there we are.
That's right.
The next meeting, councillors, will be at the council chamber on the 13th of December this year, 273 Main Street, Bairnsdale. Are there any requests for leave of absence? None that I've seen, CEO.
None received, Mayor.
Thank you. Open forum, CEO, the petitions, questions or public submissions?
So, Mayor, thank you. We have no petitions or questions of council. We do have one public submission for item 5.3.1.
Yes.
Which we will discuss and get the presentation will happen at that point in time.
Terrific.
Of which we are potentially looking to move the order to bring that up.
Terrific. When we get to item 5,
Correct.
we'll deal with that matter when we get
Correct.
to item 5. Okie dokie. Thank you. I don't think there's any notices of motion.
No.
There is no deferred business. And we are now on to councillor and delegate reports. And I'm happy to move to my right tonight. Just to keep you on your toes there, Deputy Mayor.
Thanks very much, Mark. Done a number of things in the last while, but I won't dwell on them, but I'll just run through a few, which was one of the On the 10th of November was the Q Club breakfast at Riversley, which was a very, very good presentation and detailed a number of helps that are available for businesses with sourcing funds, taxation advice, all that sort of stuff. It was really a good presentation. On the 11th, of course, was Remembrance Day, and once again the Lakes Entrance RSL conducted an 11 o'clock service, which was very well attended and very dignified in the way it was carried out. It was a really nice event. 13th of November, I had the pleasure of seeing the opening of the Lions Shed at Swan Reach. That was significant to me because one of the first places I went to as a councillor was to meet with the Twin Rivers Lions at Swan Reach, and they detailed their need for a storage shed come meeting place, and here we are 18 months or so down the track and it's a reality, so that was really great to see. On the 15th, again with Lions, I was accompanied by Delia from the Lakes Service Centre Library to accept a cheque for $1,500 from the Lions Club $2 raffle that they run every Friday night in Lakes, and that donation is specifically for early child learning within the library. So that was a great gesture by Lions, and I think very, very welcomed by the council. Of course, on the 16th of November, along with quite a few other councillors, attended the Accommodation Expo at Buchan, which was another great event, and the same night we went to the Yakvik Future Proof Project dinner at Meetung. And I think Kirsten and Jane and Mark will agree there were some pretty inspiring people at that. It was a really good night. And on the 18th, Santa Claus in the guise of the mayor and his assistant being me attended the Eastwood Shopping Centre 10th anniversary of its opening, and to celebrate that we between us gave away $10,000 to 10 lucky people. Yeah, which was and that was a really great event. And the only other thing that I would like to mention was we had the Marina Birth Holders meetings on Saturday the 19th, and the one theme that came out of all that was the appreciation that everyone involved in those meetings have for Angela and Belinda, our staff who more or less run the marinas. So I just want to publicly put on the record just how much the job that they do is appreciated. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, thanks for that. Councillor Councillor Crook, I should say.
I am in Councillor Stowe's chair, but we do look quite different.
It must be a hologram of him that I'm seeing.
Indeed. Thank you, Mayor. Look, as I did at our last meeting, I'd just like to mention family violence again, and specifically the United Nations International Campaign, 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence, which now takes place each year from the 25th of November, International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, until the 10th of December, International Human Rights Day. Our council is a proud partner in this movement to end violence, and end violence against women in particular. And while this is an international campaign, it's an issue which looms large here at home, as our own Shire continues to experience this problem at higher rates than 78 of the 79 councils in Victoria, meaning that we have the second highest rate of family and domestic violence. So what can we do about that? We can call it out. When we see sexism, when we see violence, when we see abuse, we need to call it out in all its forms. And hopefully if we continue to make that effort together, we can reduce those rates and make people's lives more enjoyable. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crook. Councillor Van Diggle.
I'm going to leave most of my reports for the written report for Vanessa, but I just wanted to talk about two things. One of them was this morning's event with the grade 4 students from St Mary's. So unfortunately there wasn't a lot of councillors there, but I was expecting that there might be about 15 grade 4s coming, but I think we had 74? 74 grade 4s in this building. And to me, that's really exciting because I think I went through high school with no one really understanding what council did, what democracy is. And so I think it's really nice to start teaching that really young. And Mark did an amazing job of welcoming the young people, and someone was sitting in your chair and yeah, I know, someone tried to steal your chair. And Mark just kept referring like, come on, CEO, what did you think? And it was a really fun event, and to us, what they had learned throughout the term. So for me, and when we went to Canberra, there was, someone had done a speech about how people were starting to doubt that democracy works. And so I think it's really interesting to be able to teach them young what that actually means and how that's exactly what we do around the table. So that was a real highlight for me. I'm really glad I went along. And the other thing I wanted to mention, and I don't have anything prepared, so I'm sort of winging it, but Anthony and I met with Ashley Jones from the Country University Centres to have a bit of a talk about the Country University model and I guess how it differs from the current East Gippsland Study Hub. Because as most people know, I'm quite interested in the study hub, but I don't necessarily think that our current model is the best for East Gippsland. So I've been very open about that. But I guess we just took the time to learn about what the different model is, and maybe some improvements that we could make to the East Gippsland Study Hub, acknowledging that we're only a partner, but I guess I'd be really keen to continue advocating and to the LEN to see if we could make some improvements around the study hub, because I think it's a great asset to East Gippsland, but most people I know don't even know it exists yet. So I think there's some more work we can play in that space. So I'm not exactly sure what the next steps are, but I'll be sure to keep you updated. Thank you.
Councillor Van Diggle, thank you. I'm going to move across the room through the online councillors and see if, Councillor Buckley, if you've got a report for us.
Thank you, Mayor. Indeed, I do. I was involved with the Remembrance Day event in Adomio, which was beautifully done by Major Smith, who gave an incredible speech to the Omeo primary school children, and Tony Kewish was there as well, presenting the wreath, and I just thought it was very touching to see that the young children engaging in that process and understanding the sacrifice that has been made for our freedom, and how important that is, that supports democracy that we live in. So that was one thing that I started with. Then I also went to the event that was held in Maule on the 18th of November for the native timber industry. It was an incredible display of an industry that is so prevalent and so important to East Gippsland. There was literally over 100 timber trucks that all rallied from the whole part of the regions, different parts of the regions, and they came together. And it was quite an incredible display of signs. It was very well attended. Hundreds of people were there, lots of children, signs saying, save my dad's job and all those sorts of things. And even a coffin was brought in that stated, our job's our future, written on the sign, on the side of it. And it was incredibly concerning to me, and as the representative for the East Gippsland Shire Council on timber towns, it's been made very clear that we have a very good position for East Gippsland, with our position paper, and the current situation as it stands at present is that the Labor government announced its forest plan to phase out our native forest logging by 2030, and that the harvest levels will be maintained at current levels to 2024. Now, at the moment, what has happened is that there's been an injunction and the industry has been brought to a halt, and meanwhile there have been businesses that will no longer be able to operate, and perhaps they will be closing down because of that injunction, and it has affected the paper mill in Traralgon. So I just want to finish by saying that this industry is only being offered 100 $120 million as a transition package for the whole of Victoria. And a recent economic report shows the industry is worth $311 million per annum across 2 eastern shires in Wellington and East Gippsland alone. So the Timber Towns has asked the state government to rethink its position on the decision to phase out native timber industry. So that's the conclusion of my report tonight, Mayor.
Councillor Buckley, thank you. Councillor Uri.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to follow on from Councillor Crook's mention of the 16 days of activism, and I'm proudly wearing the T-shirt this evening. I'm sure we all are upset and alarmed at the levels of family violence that we have in East Gippsland. So whatever we can do to draw attention to this issue, I think the better. As Councillor Crook said, it is an annual event. And it not just draws attention to the violence, but also to contributing factors of inequality, discrimination and sexism. And the theme of this year's activism is to call it out. So I think it's up to all of us to speak up when we see evidence of those things happening, because we know that it does lead to unacceptable levels of violence and women in particular being unsafe. The second thing, and I'm happy to submit my written report to be included in the minutes, but I just wanted also to mention there is an emerging and interesting process in our community which has been started by Voices of the East, or VOTE. It's a process which has begun in our community using kitchen table conversations, which I'm sure a lot of people will be familiar with. And it involves informal gatherings of people in people's homes or in cafes or public spaces, engaging in a wide range, in a series of questions, discussing questions, and basically having a civic discourse. It's about listening and speaking about what people value about our place and what they think about their elected representatives at the 3 different levels of government, and what they think they can do to improve things in their own places, in this case in East Gippsland. It's a well-used model which was designed and described by Mary Crooks, AO, and Lee McPherson in their book of the same name. And it's found to be a really effective way to garner a much wider range of views and ideas than more traditional consultation methods. So the first report is being distributed and has been sent to councillors. I've also sent it on to Council's senior executive. I think it makes for interesting reading and provides very relevant information from Council's perspective, because it's important that we know what's going on in our communities, incredibly important, and this is one way of hearing some of those voices. I see it as an interesting new step for the democratic process, and we've been hearing a bit about democracy already this evening. So I congratulate those who've initiated the process, and I look forward to kitchen table conversations rolling out further next year and hearing more from our communities. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Uri, and it's really nice to hear you talk about those kitchen table conversations. And I've had a long association with Mary Crooks as well, who's the CEO of the Victorian Women's Trust. And she was a lecturer of mine at university in the 1980s. We've been a friend ever since. Isn't that amazing?
Great.
Yep. Councillor White.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I was unable to attend any Remembrance Day service this year, but certainly do take that day as a very solemn day to do, basically to do with the sacrifices made for us to be where we are today. But those passers-by on the highway at 11 a.m. probably wondered what that bloke and his wife were doing sitting out in the middle of the paddock with the ute stopped and taking our minute silence and then listening to the bugler. So it wasn't forgotten or lost on me, but unfortunately I could not attend any of the services. But a couple of events that I have gone to. This was on Wednesday the 16th of November, an evening over at the Lucknow Uniting Church, where the Rotary Club run their junior Rotary Community Awards, where young grade sixes from around the Shire, they go through a series of tests, mostly all community orientated, and to learn skills to assist them as they leave primary school and go to high school. And there has been, since this was first formed, over 3,000 children of our region have actually received these awards, and this year was sort of no exception. It was 73, which was, I'm not sure whether I'm going to feature on too many mantelpieces, but I had 73 presentations to do and then smile and with the recipient, and they'll get a copy of that photograph. But
And they'll love that and remember it, Councillor.
but one boy, Zach Crisp from Swifts Creek, he came down, and him and his couple of mates, there's 3 boys that graduated, got up and spoke about their experience in all this. And all Zach could say that, they did cooking class and had cups of tea with elderly people, etc., and helped them. And all he could talk about was the fringe benefits of doing the course. So I was able to say afterwards that, Zach, I've got no doubt in my mind you will become a counsellor, because we too have to declare our fringe benefits. So you're right, you're on the right track now. So in another decade or so, we may see a Zach Crisp sitting around the table here. Then a few days later, which was an absolute honour, I was asked by the author of a book on the Lindenow Primary School, would I come to launch it? And I was absolutely thrilled to accept Judy's invitation. Now, Judy Richardson has written a number of books on the Lindenow area, and she just loves her history, and she had involvement also with the Historical Society, because they've got so many records and photographs. But this was for the Lindenow Primary School, the book which they've given a couple of copies to our own library, but it was 150 years of Lindenow Primary School, which is no mean feat.
It's a long time.
There was probably 150 people attended that Saturday morning at the hall. They chose the hall rather than the school, thinking obviously for a bit of space and a stage and more parking. But it was a really great. It's a great document, full of photographs, particularly of later years when the school photographs are pretty good, but then also full of really old things. And there was, I think, a copy of the 100th year, which Judy's book was about as big as the laptop here, and the 100th one was about the size of a birthday card with about as many pages. So it was great to see that was still, people still had copies of that. But the interesting thing for the Lindenow area is, unfortunately, as other communities have shrunk, that they have brought those small schools into their fold. And, there's children from Merloo. There's actually, I think, 17, maybe the number, of children travel down from Dargo every day and go home. It's a well over an hour drive to get those kids to school, but the Dargo school got too small, and I think now in recollection it might be 12, but too small, but they're still getting they're getting a very good education at Lindenow.
Right.
And the other thing was, from day one of the primary school opening 150 years ago, in fact, I must clarify it was actually 150 years last year, but COVID denied them the opportunity to do the launch. There are family names that were in the first classes at that school 150 years ago who still are in the area. Children are still going to the Lindenow Primary School, so I thought that's absolutely remarkable. So we call it the Lindenow Primary School, but right now in its present space it's Lindenow and District probably, although the Lindenow South School is a standalone school, but that's a growing community. But likes of Merloo, of course, many years ago Fernbank Hillside, Rose Hill, Kalulu, all those schools are gone now, but at least the children are getting a really good education. And Adam, the principal out there, really nice person. I'd not met him until Saturday, but really great guy, and he threw a lot of effort into this book. And as I say, the copies are available for sale for anybody that maybe went to Lindenow Primary School over the years for $30, and it's well worth it. So thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Greason.
Thank you, Mayor. Federation University runs innovation breakfast webinars, which are really interesting. So I went to one called Welcoming Regional Migration. The keynote speaker was Vivian Nguyen, AM, who's the Victorian Multicultural Commission chairperson. And the discussion was around welcoming diversity and the significant evidence supporting the fact that, you know, the higher the number of multicultural people, the better the economic development in an area, and some discussion too about the ongoing discrimination that people are experiencing. So one story that really resonated for me was the fact that many people change their family names when they're applying for jobs and they don't get to interview stage, and they work out that it's because of their family name. So they change their family names in order to get interviews for positions. Many end up setting up their own small businesses as the only way of bringing in income. So just, you know, we need to celebrate new migrants and help support their settlement and ensure locals are prepared for them and welcoming. And just to remember too that 52% of Australians were born overseas, although it's a much lower number here, it's about 5% I think, and increasing. I also went to a presentation from the IQ Club. Councillor Stowe had made the arrangements for this event to happen, and it was really very interesting. The IQ Club is a club of 80 businesses, and the IQ Club promotes these businesses and ensures there's a good standard, that they operate at a good standard. They have industry-centred network and a services-based network. And something I learnt that I hadn't heard before is that a lot of people through COVID failed to submit tax returns and have ended up, you know, 2 years later owing the tax department a lot of money and in big trouble because of it. So these people have committed to coming back to East Gippsland on a regular basis, and I think there are a lot of people in the community who would gain from them, a lot of businesses too. It's not that I'm touting their business, but it really is an interesting resource, and they do quite a lot of pro bono work. I went to the Accommodation Expo at the Buchan Hall, which was well attended and really good. So really nice presentation about tiny houses and using them for bed and breakfast businesses on bush blocks. And Richard Hoxley gave an excellent presentation on planning for tourism accommodation, which was very well received and very comprehensive. So I learnt a lot from that too. The Yak Vic evening was fantastic, as Councillor Allen said, and
It was great, wasn't it?
It was excellent. It was really joyous occasion, yeah. And last week I went to the Gippsland and East Gippsland Aboriginal Co-op's AGM and community meeting at St Mary's Parish Hall, and that was very well attended, and some really good discussion happened between the community and the CEO and board, and it's really, you know, a huge amount of work's been done since the board appointed their new CEO, Shelley Strickland, and really have to congratulate them. It's very impressive. Thank you.
Councillor Greason, thank you. Sorry, I was just having a little tete-a-tete with the Deputy Mayor there, but thank you very much for your report there. Thank you, councillors. Pardon me, I've got a couple of things that I'd just like to acknowledge. The Buchan Accommodation Expo and CEO, your staff who facilitated that expo at Buchan should be really congratulated. There was a great crowd of people there and a real sense of optimism amongst the community around the potential of the visitor economy. Yak Vic has been mentioned, and I just want to point out that Yak Vic Community of Practice meeting, that our young people who are involved in that are part of a $10 million grant across 6 local government areas and 4 ACOs in bushfire-affected parts of East Gippsland. Really amazing. employing young people to become peer facilitators and engaging young people in that process, and young people 12 to 25 who will get paid to participate in those meetings. So it is actually a great incentive to get away from those other part-time jobs and become engaged in a community project. Really fantastic. It's an amazing piece of work. Councillors, last Saturday I attended the Tambo Group Fire Pot Fiesta. Now this sounds a bit crazy, but this is part of an ongoing bushfire recovery program that the CFA are working through. Tambo Group incorporates some of the more bushfire-affected areas, such as Sarsfield, and it was really important to be there. And these gatherings continue to be the recovery glue for our communities. Incredibly important. So congratulations to Kylie from CFA and everybody who contributed to that, including East Gippsland Community Foundation, who contributed funding to that. And it's been mentioned already, but the grade 4s from St Mary's who are here this morning can't underestimate the importance of civics and citizenship and young people being involved. And councillors, as an educator, I can tell you that there's a strong correlation between literacy and numeracy and trust in government. So we have to have young people, educated, literate and numerate, and they'll become better young citizens and active participants in the democratic process in the future. So wonderful that those young people and their teachers brought them here. And thank you, councillors, for being here. And I understand if you couldn't, we are all busy. Pardon me, councillors, a couple of quick things also. I just thought you've mentioned this a couple of you already, but the 16 days of activism, the 25th November to 10 December, marks the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Councillors, violence against women is absolutely abhorrent. It's preventable and the challenge belongs to us. And as a couple of you have alluded to, East Gippsland has the highest level of family violence in Victoria and has remained in the top 4 in the Victorian Police statistics of reported family violence since 2017. In East Gippsland, 40% of reported incidents have children as witnesses. And seeing those young people today, that sort of statistics breaks my heart. And it's absolutely unacceptable. So I think that we all continue to work with community partners to generate action and conversations about gender equality, respect and reducing the incidence of violence across our community. And councillors, as community leaders, it really does start with us. So we can take the lead on that. Councillors, I also want to, speaking of democracy, it's probably not lost on you that there was an election last weekend. And Victorians and Gippslanders went to the polls, and on behalf of Council, I'd like to formally congratulate the Nationals MP, Tim Bull, for being re-elected to the seat of Gippsland East for the 4th term. And I also congratulate the Andrews Labor government on its re-election. And we look forward to working with Tim, our Eastern Region Upper House representatives, who probably haven't quite been decided yet, and the government over the next 4 years to ensure East Gippsland has the infrastructure and an economy that enriches our environment, our lifestyle, our character and our communities. Councillors, as I mentioned about that fire pot fiesta, we remain in recovery, but we also have an eye on the future. And our region has both challenges and opportunities with recovery, industry, the environment, and through the provision of services. Investment both in dollars and support for our people remains vital. We as a council have a clear set of advocacy priorities to support our short to long-term future. We'll continue to advocate with our local MPs and the newly elected government to see projects and policy reforms supported. These include key infrastructure items like the Lakes Entrance Indoor Stadium and the Performing Arts Centre, long-term bushfire recovery such as those fire pot fiestas, and community resilience, homelessness, roads, bridges and airports, digital connectivity, coastal infrastructure, waste management, climate change, natural resource management, and supporting a high-quality, low-volume native timber harvesting industry where our communities continue to thrive. Pardon me, forests have multiple uses and biodiversity is protected is also a clear position of Council. Councillors, I think I speak on behalf of us all that we look forward to continued investment in and support for people of East Gippsland over the next 4 years. Thank you, councillors. That is my council report. Thank you for all your advocacy and your work, councillors. We know you are busy people. And I've got a bit of a frog in my throat, and I'll just find my speaking notes right here. Councillors, we're moving on to item 5 in our agenda. And Councillor Allen, are you happy to assist with bringing item 5.3.1 forward?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move a motion that...
And look, it might have magically appeared in front of you.
That's the magic of technology. I'd like to move that the item listed 5.3.1 on the agenda be considered before the item listed as 5.1.1.
Thank you for moving that. Do I have a second to councillors? Councillor Greeson, did you want to speak to that? Councillor Allen?
Oh, only to say that when you've got someone in the chamber, it saves them being bored to death waiting to get to their item.
Terrific. Councillor Greeson, is the matter opposed, councillors? Would anybody else like to speak to or against it? So we're moving that we bring this item forward to this point in the agenda. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. CEO, that's carried. Councillors, if you can just navigate your way through to that point in your agenda, item 5.3.1, and this is planning application correction. Here we have planning application 540-2021P 164 Deep Creek Road, Bruthen, building works and dwelling works for a dwelling and outbuilding, and we have a speaker to the matter.
We do. Thank you, Mayor. Mr. David Fonaro, I believe, is going to speak.
G'day,
Yes.
David. Feel free to manoeuvre that microphone up to your lofty height there.
Thank you very much for the
Okay,
time.
so 5 minutes.
No, just give me a signal when I get up to like 4 minutes and I'll wrap it up.
Yeah, we will. You'll be right.
So my family and I have backgrounds, just a quick, I grew up the back of Warrigal. So I classify myself as a local Gippslander. I went to Sydney after a little bit after finishing my high school years, doing engineering, chasing some big projects and getting experience. Eventually moved back to Gippsland a few years ago, just before COVID hit in 2020, at which my wife and I relocated to East Gippsland and we moved into Bairnsdale. My wife is from Queensland and she's a registered pharmacist and has worked over 10 years in professional healthcare in hospitals. She currently works at the Bairnsdale Hospital here and I work with Jarvis Norwood Constructions. We purchased the block of land, 164 Deep Creek Road, Bruthen, 2 years ago with the intent to build a property on there. The block itself is zoned rural living, at which it is in the zoning that we're allowed to build a property, but it has the bushfire overlay on it. We, before purchasing, were able to get some people out there to give us an approximate bell rating for it, to determine what the cost would be to approve that building approval, which we were told what it was approximately bid, and we purchased the property. Since we purchased it, the CFA gave us approval, not approval, they after the bushfires, they determined that we had to clear the boundaries, not more of a request, but a demand, so we did that. We cleared 20 metres around the entire boundary, and since then I built a fence. That's about as much as we've done. We haven't bulldozed any trees, haven't bulldozed a house plot, haven't touched any of that. We've just then proceeded to the planning process. So we've got an architect, we had Slater and Gordon's out there surveying the block, and we've gone through the process. I did give you a PowerPoint presentation, which I didn't realise you didn't have PowerPoint, so I printed it in PDF. So that was handed out to you guys, and the guys on Zoom, I guess it was emailed to you, I believe. So
yeah, thanks, David. We did get a copy of that, so thank you.
Yep. So it was just to assist and I guess aid the application request. Just regarding the first page, it was kind of a title page. The second page is the map of Bruthen. The block itself has the main access up Deep Creek Road. It's approximately 1.3 k's up the road, 1 k of council road, and then 300 metres into the state forest and Dwelp Road. It has an alternative 4 other accesses to the block. 3 of them are all vehicle terrain. 1 of them is 4-wheel drive specifically only. So there is ample access to get in and out. Moving on with the presentation, the third page. That's the aerial shot taken 2 years ago. That shot there outlines, the red line outlines where Slayer and Gordons have mapped our boundaries for the block. In between the green outline and the red, that's the 20 metres boundary that we've cleared in accordance with CFA's request to clear it from bushfire risks. The inner left-hand corner, the more western side, that's our proposed dwelling that we've applied for council. You can see in the centre, that is the location of the house. The CFA, when they visited the block, that's where they recommended the house to be located for the safest location. It was a bit closer to Deep Creek Road, being our access, but they've recommended that is the safest spot, and we've gone with that. The area around that, to meet the farm is zoned from our bushfire rating as a zone rating 29. So an ember attack and radiant heat, with the requirements of clearing around a house dwelling of 30 metres with a defendable space of 20 metres. The CFA, upon first request, said that wasn't enough in their opinion, and we've increased that defendable space from boundary to boundary around the house, proposed house site. That is 200 metres, basically from boundary to boundary, that we are requesting. The second page, or the next page, goes on. This is from the Risk Fire Consultants, the company who we employed to do our bushfire rating. This was their report that determined what their risk was on the block as a Bell 29. In their own words, they have specified that the development of the site will support the reduction of bushfire risk and the neighbouring properties. So if we were to get approval that this would protect not only us, but also our neighbours around. For those who were able to come out and visit it, and those know the local area, we own the top of the ridge and the northern face of the hill. The southern face is Lambourne's Road and Station Road in Bruthen. So it's very much the town of Bruthen is our downward slope neighbouring neighbours. So that bushfire bell rating would only enhance and protect our community in Bruthen. Yep. Oh, 1 minute left. Okay. That was quick. Next page, moving on real quick. Summary from the Risk Fire Consultants basically said that Bell 29, it's quite acceptable to be able to achieve a safe fire risk for our family to build a property at this location. And they've given the conclusion there on that page, just on the left. You guys can read it. The next page goes along to the proposed dwelling. The house is an underground house. So basically the east-west sides and the back and the roof will be buried, and the front facade will be exposed. So it is in my opinion, the most robust design you can get for a fire, and also environmentally friendly, and many different reasons why. But we feel that we've done all that we can possibly to be able to make it fireproof and safe for our family, as I have 2 young kids. The next photo along is a photo of an example of a house that we propose to build, just as a visual. That there is, basically would be very similar to what we'd build. And the last page was an additional thing that we proposed for the council, that we would put an underground fire bunker in there, just to remove any risks for us to be able to, if there was a fire and we couldn't get out of our block, that we had a fire bunker there. We feel that we've done all we can to do and mitigate any fire risk to meet our overlay for the bushfire risk, and that we've gone above and beyond what's required. So we've designed our house to be a Bell 40 rather than the Bell 29, and we've also recommended to put this underground fire bunker in, only to be rejected for fire risk. I've had our local CFA captain from Swan Reach. He said he would himself personally give his recommendation, being to site, that it would be an acceptable dwelling with the design and with the proposed clearing and proposed dwelling application.
David,
that's all I have.
thank you, David, for that presentation. We really appreciate it.
No worries, I'll sit back down.
Okay, councillors, did anybody want to have a quick question of David? So you can, if there's any, before we move quickly on to our officers' reports. Yes, go ahead, Councillor White.
Hi, David. Questions relating to the CFA. You mentioned in your presentation of what the CFA had requested you to do, which you have done.
Yep.
Yet at the end of it, the CFA have actually rejected or proposed that it not be a suitable site. So are we talking about two different sections of the CFA, or was it the same part of the organisation, i.e. permanent CFA that have said no and your local brigade who have said yes? Is that what's happened?
Yes, so the local, the Melbourne CFA, the head guys in Melbourne, now it's all gone down to there, have come out and visited the site. They were the ones giving us advice on what to do for the building, and we followed their advice. But they didn't reject it, but they didn't endorse it. So it's kind of the grey area where they've pushed it back on the council to make a decision, more so. So they do have an opportunity to reject it, but it wasn't done that way. I believe their report was submitted to you.
Yeah, no, we've got a copy of that. Thanks. Thanks, John. Councillor Buckley, quick question.
Look, thanks, David. I've had a really good at what you've done here, and it's quite substantial. So my question to you is, when you bought the property, it was of the understanding that that it was residential, that you would be able to build in this area, correct?
Yes.
Right. And I just wanted to make sure that there was some talk of perhaps DELP having assessed the property as suitable. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. So it's only just a recommendation from the CFA in Melbourne that stated that it was up to the council to make the decision, that they weren't quite sure either way.
Correct.
Is that your understanding of it? Okay. Thank you very much, David.
Councillor Buckley, thank you. Thanks, David. Job's done. Mr McConnell. Over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. So, councillors, before you is a report in relation to the planning permit application for 164 Deep Creek Road, Bruthen, and it's for buildings and works for a dwelling and outbuilding, as has been outlined. So, thank you for that. The report seeks council's resolution to issue a notice of refusal to grant a planning permit for the development of the dwelling. And I suppose in that, firstly, I'd just like to recognise it is a challenging circumstance that we have in front of us with this application. So it is property that's about, or just under 10 hectares in size, and as was outlined, it is zoned rural living. The applicant, David, has certainly, as outlined, given some careful consideration to the matters related to management of bushfire risk, and that's certainly acknowledged. The key issues in relation to this relate to, there is both the bushfire management overlay applying to the property and also an erosion management overlay, but it's probably the bushfire management overlay and the broader bushfire management policy that is most applicable in this case. So, importantly, the current bushfire management policy from planning's perspective in Victoria requires that decision makers give priority to the protection of human life. So that's the requirement of policy in Victoria. Key issues in relation to this site, it is obviously there's a proposal for a sensitive land use residential in a landscape that has significant fire risk, and the surrounding area is a large undulating continuous forest, and there is significant bushfire risk associated with that, which we've seen in recent years. As I outlined earlier, there has been some significant consideration given to the bushfire mitigation measures, and those matters have been referred to CFA. One thing to note that development of the site would actually require significant removal of vegetation also in order to meet those requirements for bushfire protection. I suppose at this point I refer to the advice from the Country Fire Authority. So officers are not aware of any earlier advice that CFA may have provided to the applicants at various stages. What we have in front of us is the written formal advice from CFA that on 3 occasions has indicated that they don't support the development of the site for residential purposes. And that's been through, there's been advice, there's been opportunity to modify certain aspects of the proposal and provide further advice. And so in those circumstances, we take very seriously the advice that's been provided from CFA. So with that, councillors, you have a officer's recommendation in front of you that relates to effectively the refusal of the permit application, and I've got Robert Pringle online also to assist with any questions. So thank you.
Mr McConnell, thank you. Councillor Crook, questions?
Thank you, and I'll direct this question to Robert. Robert, it would seem that the applicant has done everything that's been asked of him. He's commissioned some independent advice around the level of bushfire risk. He's got an architecturally designed house that's, with the specific intent of being as safe as is possible. He's voluntarily said that he'll put a fire bunker there and provide extra water. And my question is, what could the applicant do in this situation to actually construct a dwelling on the property that he's bought? Or is it in fact the case that the planning scheme is just going to prevent such developments into the future because the risk is just too great to human life?
Thank you for the question, Councillor, and through you, Mayor. I think the latter is the case, that CFA have asked for details and those details have continued not to meet the marks that are set in their assessment. Now, they are the technical experts in this, and the planning officers are relying on the advice that we've received back, which is effectively, we can't support what's being proposed. And they are also stating that they don't see a way forward for the development to be approved, which minimises the risk to an acceptable level.
Sorry, but can I clarify further, but hasn't the applicant been given specific conditions that need to be met by the CFA that have in fact been met, and now there's a refusal being issued? I just fail to understand where the disconnect is here, where the applicant's been given some conditions that have been met, but now he's being met with a refusal. Could you just explain that for me, please?
I wouldn't suggest that it's necessarily a tick-the-box exercise of if you do this, says CFA, then you will get an approval. There are standards and objectives to be met in the planning scheme and in the Australian standards, and there is still a discretion. And again, the technical experts are not satisfied with the level of detail that has been provided to get to a point where their recommendation is to approve. If they got to that point, or if they thought that there was going to be a potential to get to that point, then I believe that they wouldn't have provided a statement that said, effectively, we don't see a way forward for this. Now, we're relying again on the technical experts. They're concerned that there is still an element of risk that makes it so that they cannot, at this point in time, consent to the grant of the permit. The status of the referral authority is a recommending referral authority. Council can take on board the advice that's been provided to us. However, there is an unknown element of risk and liability in approving this proposal where we do not have clear and determined advice from the referral authority. There are too many unknowns.
Okay, thank you. It just seems that the proponent's been provided with some advice that's been followed, and now that advice isn't good enough. It just doesn't seem particularly fair. Maybe that's just a comment.
Councillor Crook, thank you. Councillor Uri.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this one is for you too, Robert, if you wouldn't mind. I can't remember this situation arising before, although perhaps it has. Is this a result of a change in policy? So we've been, the broader bushfire management policy has been referenced in Mr McConnell's presentation. Is the prioritisation of the protection of human life, is that a recent change to the policy, and how does that intersect with this land being zoned for residential base?
Thank you for the question, Councillor, and through you, Mayor. Yes, it is fairly recent in terms of planning provisions and when the land may have been zoned in a rural living zone. The research that I've done indicates that the land was zoned rural living at least when this planning scheme was adopted in its current format in 2000, and perhaps even earlier than that. Whereas the bushfire management overlay and policy in relation to the bushfire management overlay has evolved since that time. And most significantly, in 2017, with a series of government amendments, so either a GC or a VC amendment, which altered the Victorian planning provisions and the bushfire management overlay mapping. And in some of those government amendments, it was included the elevation of bushfire risk to be number one. It is the ultimate consideration that we must give when making a determination, and especially one where the bushfire management overlay is affecting the land.
Okay, thank you. I think I do have another question, but it might be something I'll follow up with you because like Councillor Crook, I think it's such an unfortunate position for this family to find themselves in, I think, and I wouldn't like it to happen to anybody else. So I just wonder what the, is it a case of just buyer beware? And I know this family has done a lot of, well, at least some degree of research before they bought the property, from what David has said. But is that all, and will there be other properties in East Gippsland that will be in a similar situation? So I guess that's a follow-up question it doesn't relate to this application directly. Thank you, Robert.
Thanks, Councillor Uri. Councillor Buckley.
Yes, this is through you, Mayor. This is a question for Robert. I'm deeply concerned that this is setting a precedent. I mean, there's bushfire overlays on so many residential area and blocks, throughout East Gippsland. My question is, you would deal with seeing a lot of applications and designs. In your view, Robert, or the view of the planning department, the proposal and the building, would you consider it to be one of the finer examples of a safe design and a design that has been done specifically for fire mitigation purposes?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Buckley, and through you, Mayor. Yeah. Look, this proposal is a proposal that needs to be assessed on its own merits and considering the landscape surrounding it. We confirm that the applicant has put in a great deal of effort in responding to the risks and to the controls. However, we're in a position where we do not have support of a referral authority, and it is our responsibility to consider that additional risk, and again, the primary consideration of risk to life and property. Mm-hmm. This is not necessarily precedence, because each individual application needs to be considered on its own merits. But if we want to refer to precedence, there is precedence that in low density residential zones or general residential zones that are affected by the bushfire management overlay that has been introduced since the land was zoned, that there are cases where there have been objections by CFA or letters of advice from CFA in similar circumstances where ultimately there have been permits that have been refused for single dwellings on lots that were designed to be used for residential purposes. So this is not the standalone case. It is a continuation of considerations. And again, the focus is on the individual assessment, and we're not confident without the advice to the positive from CFA that this can be supported in its current format. And we don't think, based on the last CFA advice, that anything further can be done to consider the application that gets it to the point where we can recommend approval.
Okay, thank you. Mayor, I have one question for the CEO. CEO, is it possible to have the councillors to be further briefed before making a decision if we were to defer this motion by the CFA and by DELP, so that we can have a really thorough understanding? Because my concern is if we don't defer this motion, is that perhaps we will be going down the line of maybe VCAT or some, and that may tie us up into some sort of legal complications in regards to this matter.
I'm happy for you to answer that, CEO. We have had substantial briefings on this particular matter, but do you have an answer to that?
Two things, and I'll certainly refer to Mr McConnell if he wishes to add anything, but there would be two things there for me. Firstly, I can't commit to an external agency as to whether they would or would not brief council on a particular matter. We can, we can certainly ask the question, but whether they would or not is another question. They've effectively provided their written advice. Secondly, council should not be making a decision based on whether something might or might not go to VCAT. It should be making a decision based on the information it has before it, and if it can't make a decision, then not make a decision. But we shouldn't be second guessing what might happen if a decision was made. Yep. So I just make those 2 points, but certainly it's for the councillors to consider whether they've got enough information tonight to make a decision or not. Councillor Buckley.
Okay.
Thank
you, Councillor Buckley. Stuart, Mr McConnell, you had some more to add?
So, yes, Mayor, through you, if I might add to that. So, as the CEO has indicated, it's a matter for councillors whether they wish to defer or otherwise. What I would say is that the information that officers have about any CFA advice is the information that's in front of you. We don't have information about any previous advice that CFA or Brigade or Central may have provided to the applicants. And so we take the advice, the written advice, as the final advice of the CFA. The advice we have from DELP does not relate to fire risk. It relates to other matters. So DELP's a referral agency in relation to other matters, but not in relation to the fire risk in this case. And just to confirm some matters that Mr Pringle touched on earlier, there is VCAT decisions that also go to this very question of just because a piece of land is zoned a particular way, if the overlays that trigger considerations and the risks are such that they are not acceptable, then the land just, may not be able to be used for that purpose. So it's not as if it's an automatic, it's zoned residential, therefore it will be developed as residential. It needs to still satisfy those requirements in relation to risk, etc. And the last point I might leave, and I suppose I've looked closely at the risk settings of various sites over the last period of time, and I would say that this site has a very significant risk setting, and that's reflected in the CFA advice, in that it is forested and it's continuous forest, not only in the site but also up into the public land estate for some very long distance. And so there's if a fire was to start, there's not a lot that would stop a fire from coming through. So I note those general observations about the risk setting and how it might compare to other sites, and that's reflected in the CFA advice, I think.
Councillor Van Diegel.
Thank you. Stuart, this might be for you because it sort of touches on what you've just said, but if it's zoned rural living, but it's been since 2017 that there's potential that you can't build on it anymore, is it council's responsibility to rezone that area? Because I can't imagine if I thought I could build on a property because it's zoned rural living, that wouldn't it be our responsibility to some degree to make it clear that there's going to be a move towards moving it away from rural living? Because I'm assuming blocks around that area are now going to have to be rezoned eventually.
Thanks, Councillor Van Dingel, and through you, Mayor. There will be large, significant numbers of pieces of land, not just in East Gippsland but elsewhere, that are not ultimately suitable for the use that they're currently zoned for in some way. The introduction of controls around bushfire risk is one. Controls in relation to flooding and various other risks are another example, and this is part of what we need to step our way through. I think ultimately the question is, unfortunately, for each person to make the inquiries as best they are able to at the time of making decisions around purchase and so on, because those matters will need to be considered in each case.
Yeah, but I feel like to some degree that has been done. Those matters have been considered and the applicant has done whatever they can in order to meet those requirements, and it's still... So I find it interesting that we're still claiming to be zoned rural living. Like, I feel like that needs to become really clear to any person who... And I know that goes with a certain degree of doing their research, but, like, isn't this a very sad situation to be in? So I guess if this is going to happen and we're going to refuse it, for example, I'd be interested in moving that rezoning along pretty quickly, however that looks.
Rezoning is a long and complex matter.
Yep.
I have heard that, but there's ways to speed it up.
Councillor White, just a second. Councillor Buckley is just ahead of you, then yourself.
Yes, thank you. This is for Mr McConnell. Before we heard David state that it had been made clear in all of his discussions that if we were to approve his application, that by developing this area would keep the adjacent properties and the township of Bruthen add a safety factor. And it's quite clear on the maps that there are, similar dwellings or farmlets right next to where he's proposing in doing this. So can you please explain to me how it makes it more dangerous when it's clear that putting in a defendable space and looking after that area and keeping it well kept would actually be the opposite? It would work to the benefit of surrounding neighbours.
Thanks, Councillor Buckley, and through you, Mayor. There's probably two comments I'd make in response to that. The decisions we make in relation to this application need to reflect the policy and the planning scheme as it stands today. And as was outlined earlier, in recent years, not last year, but in recent years, there have been significant changes to planning policy in Victoria, which require decision makers to prioritise the protection of human life. The applicant did refer to advice he'd received that that development of the site would improve the safety or similar of the surrounds. That's what we heard earlier in the presentation. That's not advice that council has received. So that is not reflected in the formal advice from CFA.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Councillor White.
Yeah, thank you. The first question is, and it might be David that has to answer this, but I did hear that DELP had given permission to clear the entire property.
Don't think so.
I find that unlikely, but...
As far as I believe, the developer have given approval to clear the proposed clearing of the farm, for the house,
The
defendable space.
half of the property?
Just half, it's
Okay.
not the whole.
Thank
We
you.
haven't asked her to clear the whole.
All right, thank you. Now the question probably to you, yourself, Stuart or Robert. The first dot point here says that with significant fire risk and fails to minimise risk to life and property. How would you come to that conclusion when you look at the plans that David's proposing here with a bunker and an underground house, state of the art and visionary, that it fails to minimise. So you've started at a level up here somewhere and just said, well, that still sits there regardless of the dwelling.
Yep. So I might, thanks Councillor White, and through you, Mayor, I might respond to a couple of things there. Firstly, the advice from DELP did not give approval or otherwise to removal of vegetation. In fact, the application, that's something that's not fully dealt with in the application. I might ask Mr Pringle in a moment to comment further in relation to that, but the advice would relate to the requirements around offsetting and or otherwise, and the requirements around native veg protection. So I might leave that for Mr Pringle to comment on in a moment. As I mentioned earlier, we certainly recognise the applicant has done significant work in terms of design on site, in terms of taking into consideration options to mitigate bushfire risk. When we consider, or when the CFA is giving advice around those things, it takes into account the works and the things that are happening on site, but it also takes into account and gives consideration to the broader context, because the site doesn't sit in isolation. It sits, in this case, in a high-risk landscape as reflected in the CFA advice. And the other thing that's also taken into account is issues around access and egress from the site and whether it's possible to safely leave the site in the event of a fire. So there's some of those broader factors that are taken into account that go beyond the specific, I'll say, works or development on the property itself. Mr Pringle, are you able to comment further on the native vegetation requirements and the advice from DELP in relation to that?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, I'm just pulling up in the agenda papers the referral response, and I'm just scrolling through. I appreciate that there is quite a significant amount of paperwork in here. So bear with me just for one moment. In terms of the considerations that council officers feel are unresolved is in relation to the provisions which exempt native vegetation removal or any vegetation removal from a permit requirement where it's implemented to create defendable space for a dwelling, where that dwelling is to be approved under Clause 4406 or the Bushfire Management Overlay. There is consideration in that the native vegetation to be removed is exempt from the need from further planning approvals where such is done to the minimum required standard for construction required on the land. So if you're building to a BAL flame zone, which might be the assessed construction requirement for a property, then there is a certain number of meters of vegetation that you can remove to create your defendable space before a planning permit is required. The application proposes to increase the amount of vegetation removal in order to reduce the bushfire attack level construction requirements to the BAL 29 standard. The applicant has additionally proposed to put in a bunker, which additionally contributes towards the reduction of the BAL standard to be built. So the disconnect that we have is, without the final CFA advice, we have not assessed whether there is additional native vegetation removal requirements under the planning scheme that is not exempt. And so we feel that at this point in time, we cannot confidently recommend on the application because there is still insufficient information, which if we had received support from the CFA, we may have then returned to the applicant and said, okay, we now have this native vegetation removal question to deal with before we can determine the application. We haven't asked for that information as yet because there is an unresolved matter relating to the bushfire management overlay. looking at the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning's referral response, which was made in relation to, sorry, I'm just double checking the control. Sorry, I'm just double checking to make sure that I got the right referral response. We gave effectively notice. There is a vegetation protection overlay on the land, and we would have given notice in relation to that vegetation protection overlay for the removal of the vegetation, not under clause 5217, which relates to native vegetation. Therefore, the referral response from DELP relates only to council's referral to them for consideration of proposed native vegetation removal under the vegetation protection overlay, not for any additional native vegetation. If we received consent from the CFA and then determined that additional consideration needed to be given to the native vegetation provisions of the planning scheme, and a further permit was required to remove that vegetation to create the defendable space, then an ecological assessment would be required. And depending on the complexity of that investigation, it would fit into one of three categories of application. And if it was a if it was a basic or intermediate assessment level, council could determine the appropriateness of that native vegetation removal. But the higher classification of vegetation removal is, again, something that would require further referral of the application to DELP. So again, that is further unresolved matters that we can't, we wouldn't reasonably ask the applicant to provide the information now, because we're at a point where we don't have the support from CFA, and without the support from CFA, we cannot recommend approval. But again, if we got the support from CFA, we would need to obtain more information from the applicant before a determination could be made.
Thanks.
Just to follow up to that, what Stuart has said about trying to drive out of that area, the applicant's proposing to build a bunker, which is, as I understand, they are fire safe, fireproof. If they're building the bunker, would they not actually use the bunker rather than try and outrun a fire?
Thanks, Councillor White, and through you, Mayor. I think there is some, it's recognised that a bunker is proposed, and there's some consideration in the planning scheme in relation to that. But it also probably needs to be recognised about the use of bunkers is typically a matter of, I suppose, last resort. I might just read a couple of sentences from the CFA advice, because I think, councillors, I think that's important. It talks about this being a Type 4 landscape, which is the highest risk that can be applied to an assessment, because the site is surrounded by forest in the proximity of steep and hilly terrain. Access to the site remains poor from the perspective of bushfire risk, with egress from the site being down forested dirt roads. A bushfire in this environment is likely to be large-scale, fast-acting, high-intensity, erratic and difficult to control. And the nature of this bushfire behaviour means the ability to adequately reduce risk on the site through bushfire protection measures is limited. And CFA is of the view that the proposal does therefore not achieve the state's bushfire safety requirements. So I think that's in a sense the summary of the CFA position.
Thank you, Mr McConnell. Councillor Van Diggle.
I had a question for Robert just before, because I feel like potentially what you said was really confusing to me. It sounded a bit like a different language. So to dumb it down for me, we're basing this particular planning application on the CFA recommendation, but if we were to say approve it, it might still not be approved later by DELP's recommendations. Is that what I understood, or did I get that completely wrong?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question, and I hope I can clarify through you, Mayor. There is information needs to be submitted if CFA were in a position today to approve the application and say that the bushfire mitigation measures are appropriate. We would then need to turn to the question of how much native vegetation removal is required, subject to a planning permit.
Okay.
That does leave us in a position where there is still a potential for another agency to become involved, or it could be assessed by council officers. And we have to weigh up again, ultimately the bushfire risk. So we'd give some credit to that, but we also have to be responsible for the biodiversity loss as a result of that proposal. So those are the considerations that we have to make. And yes, it does mean if we say today we're not going to determine the application and ask the applicant to go back and continue to make attempts to meet the standards of CFA and reduce the risk, that there may be further additional information required once CFA is happy, and that process could continue for a long period of time. We don't have an idea of how much additional back and forth that would take.
Okay, thank you. And can I ask one last question?
Yep,
I know
absolutely.
we probably want to get off this matter, but David, just before you said that the CFA from Swan Reach had come out and had, I guess, given the, so what's the...
So the local captain at the Swan Reach Brigade.
I'm just going to suggest that we shouldn't be
can you answer?
engaging with the applicant at this point, and the
Well, you did
CFA
before.
at Swan Reach is not a referral agency. I just want to point that out, councillors, that the CFA that we've got a letter of advice from is the referral agency, and that's what the planners are making the decision on, or the recommendation on. So I think we just need to concentrate on that, councillors.
May I have 30 seconds, Matt?
I'd be curious to
Come on,
hear the
David.
answer.
Yep.
20 seconds.
Look, honestly, the CFA, all due respect, they are the people to judge and assess it, and they have the
They are.
experience. The local guys are the ones who will go to fight it. The local captain can't, because of red tape, sign his name on a piece of paper to say he would endorse
Yep.
it, but he'll tell you each individually that he would.
Yeah, David, look, thank you. Knowing those CFAs and being a member, unfortunately, it'd be unlikely they would attend.
Yeah, no.
Yep, so I think we
I
have to
passed
have a
your warning
reality,
on to him,
and there's a couple of
and
CFA
he
members
didn't
here. It's,
sign it.
yep.
Yep.
Thanks, David. We're
worries.
just about at the end of the questions, councillors. Councillor Buckley, then Councillor Uri.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'll make it brief. So I just want to clarify and make it clear, and thank you, Robert. The machinations of your mind are amazing to me, the information that you can bring to
How
the
we can
table.
cope with all of that's incredible. Go ahead, Sonia.
Yeah, I want to make it clear to myself and other councillors that the CFA haven't disapproved of this. They've left, if there is a grey area here, that there could be still more information brought to the table, or there could be things done that could...
Sorry, Councillor Buckley,
yeah.
is there a question? So,
It's a question.
Yep.
If the CFA haven't disapproved of it, they've just made a recommendation. There's a difference between a disapproval and a recommendation, correct?
so the
Right.
attachment 5.3.1.2 looks pretty unequivocal.
It's not...
Robert?
My
Stuart?
question was, has it been disapproved, or is it just a recommendation at this stage? Because to me, it doesn't seem like it has... It's a recommendation. It's not a blanket disapproval.
So, Councillor Buckley, through you, Mayor, so CFA are a recommending referral authority. So council is not legally bound to follow their advice, but as the experts, we would be, we should give very careful weight to their advice.
Certainly.
So it's not, in that context, it's not binding on council.
Thank you.
That said, the advice is reasonably clear about their view of the risk at this site.
And also that there could be more done to ensure that the risk was mitigated, if given the opportunity, as Robert was saying before.
Councillor Buckley, and through you, Mayor, I might just clarify, CFA have not said that more work could get this, could identify how the proposal could be made to meet the requirements of the state policy. They've been silent in that respect.
Right, so it's a possibility. Thank you.
Councillor Uri.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a question about underground fire bunkers. So I'm not sure. I think it might be to Robert or to Stuart. My daughter lives in an area where fire bunkers are used a lot, and they certainly vary a lot. My understanding is that there's no standard for, and nobody's responsible for signing off a fire bunker and deeming it a safe place of last resort. Is that correct?
Is that Robert or Stuart?
So,
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mayor.
Yeah, thanks.
There are standards set through the building code for what constitutes a bushfire refuge. And those standards would need to be certified by a private building surveyor in relation to the proposal to construct one of those. There are also planning scheme exemptions that apply in limited circumstances to prevent the need for a planning permit for a fire refuge where such is associated with a dwelling on a lot. And there are, sort of counter exemptions as well. But I think what the question is you're asking is that at least council doesn't have an inspector who is able to assess the suitability of those shelters, and I think there's not a regime to continue to inspect or maintain those once they have been established. So like a dwelling, there is no necessarily ongoing building inspections to make sure that those buildings are continuing to be compliant to the standards of the day. I think in discussions we've talked about pools, and the point of difference is that there is a legislative and regulatory regime set up by the state government that is implemented by council and private building surveyors to make sure that those are compliant. Such systems are not in place for private bushfire shelters.
Thank you. And just if I could follow up, and just to be sure that the proposal to put in an underground fire bunker in this instance was part of the proposal that went to CFA, and subsequently they still did not give their approval for this.
That is correct. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Robert. Councillors, are there any further questions? Councillors, there is a recommendation in front of you. I have a motion. Thank you, Councillor Greason. Do I have a seconder?
Pardon me, Mayor. When is it appropriate? Mayor, may I ask some advice? When is it appropriate to put in a motion to defer?
Well, we have a motion on the table, and you can move an amendment to defer the motion, but it would have to have a seconder and have to get up.
I would like to move an amendment.
Just checking some governance there for the moment. Thank you, Councillor Buckley. So we have a motion on the table, the mover and a seconder.
Would need to be a foreshadowed motion, wouldn't it, to defer?
That's correct. Although we did start with a mover. We did have a
so
mover.
if this motion lapses, then it could be foreshadowed to defer.
We did have a mover on the officer's recommendation.
Yep. So if the motion lapses, Councillor Buckley, then your foreshadowing of a deferral could become a motion.
Sorry, I'm a little confused. I thought that before the motion was heard, I could put in a motion to defer the motion. I'm sorry, I'm still a little bit confused.
So all we can work on is the recommendation, and we have a motion now on that recommendation.
Through you, Mayor.
Yep,
we
thank you.
have a mover on that recommendation.
That's right.
Yes.
So the recommendation has been moved and seconded, and if the if this motion lapses or fails, then you have foreshadowed another motion. So that's where we're standing at the moment. Okay.
So I'm not able to put the motion before the motion's heard.
No, we can only work on the motion that's in front of us, and that's a recommendation from the officers.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Greason, would you like to speak to the matter?
Yes, briefly, thank you, Mayor. Look, council needs to make decisions that sometimes are really tough, and I have great sympathy for David and his wife with respect to this, but I actually don't believe that this is one of those tough decisions. I think we are in a position where we have to acknowledge increasing risks associated with climate change and make life the priority that's overriding everything. David has planned as much as possible to mitigate the risks, and so it's clear he knows the risks, and it can also probably be presumed, I think, that he knows his application might fail. I don't think this application is supportable for two reasons. The CFA does not support the application, has made very clear statements about how dangerous this location is. And secondly, it would require significant loss of native vegetation. So for both of these reasons, I support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Greason. Councillor Allen, did you second it? No, Councillor Uri. Sorry, I was just lost in oblivion then. Councillor Uri.
No problem. Thank you, Mayor. Unlike Councillor Greason, I do find this a difficult decision. For me, it's somewhat of a new position to be in, and I do salute the work that's being done by David and your wife to try and understand what the limitations are of this block of land and what all the issues are. It seems that you've done everything that you can, but I don't think, in my mind, that even doing everything that you can doesn't remove all the risks. And I think that's why the CFA still haven't given their approval on this. And I think it would be a brave council to go ahead on the against the advice of the CFA. I too am very concerned about climate change and the effects that will have on our weather patterns and particularly on fire danger and fire risk, which I don't know that any of us can truly understand what's ahead of us. So sadly, I support the refusal of this application.
Councillor Uri, thank you. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Councillor Buckley, would you like to speak to your opposition?
Yes, look, I thank Councillor Grecian and Councillor Uri for their sentiments on climate change, which are very well known. I believe that David is, that we should be brave and that we should support David's application. And there are many reasons why we should be brave and do that. And that is because he is setting an example for future design for us to be able to live in our areas and safely live in our areas. We should be putting this forward proudly as a council to say this is going to be best management practices for how we can live in our area, because let's face it, councillors, our area is the bush. We're surrounded by the bush. It's everywhere. So this is best management practices. And I would ask you to support the applicant today. I know that there are many concerned people in Melbourne at CFA who are experts in their fields, and I'm surprised they haven't supported David, because they haven't given a ruling on it. They've just given us some advice, and I would have liked to defer the motion so that we could have the CFA come and talk to us directly, and have DELP come and talk to us directly, and for us to support young people building and moving into our area, young professionals with families. I'm sure David loves his children and would never put them at risk. The local CFA, are supportive of what he's trying to do as well, and we should be. So I ask councillors to support David, tonight, and I wish him all the very best. I think we're setting a dangerous precedent if we start knocking back people for wanting to live in our beautiful area, because especially when they're prepared to go to this length and measures. Thank you, councillors.
Councillors, would anybody else like to speak to or against the motion? Councillor Crook, then Councillor Van Diggle.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm at pains over this, and because I think our council would be in grave error not to follow the referral advice from the subject matter experts around risk. I appreciate Councillor Buckley's sentiments, and I agree with them wholeheartedly that we need to be encouraging young professional families to move to our region and to make lives here, and that we do in fact have communities that are scattered throughout what is a heavily forested landscape. And if in fact these rules were applied now to all existing dwellings, lots of us wouldn't be able to live here, and that's the irony in this. But I guess also I take issue with the idea that this is best practice. If we were to approve applications such as this that rely disproportionately on clearing their blocks to make them as safe as can be, I think that would be an error. I don't believe we can clear our way or burn our way to safety. And so it's with some great regret that I'm going to support the motion, and I apologise to you, David, having gone through all the processes that you have. I feel like you've been sold a pup in being given the impression that you could build on this block, and unfortunately it doesn't appear that that's the case. I guess maybe there is some recourse for you in being able to use the designs, and they are excellent designs, and they are the designs that we need to have moving forward under increased fire risk, but maybe somewhere else. Thank you.
Councillor Crook, thank you. Councillor Van Diggle.
In this case, I'm going to agree with Councillor Buckley that I do not, recommend the recommendation. What would the word be? I feel like David has gone to the above and beyond what was expected, and I do understand that the CFA is a very important body and we should be listening to them, but I was really hoping to defer the motion as well, the recommendation, just in the fact that I feel like that the CFA has said no in its current form, but that there is still potential scope to see what can be done to put a building there. So I can't even imagine what it would feel like to buy a rural living block and then to have all these barriers to being able to build. And I feel like you have gone above and beyond to try to make it happen, and you know, putting a bunker in, and I do understand that that's not ideal for the CFA, but I mean, what's better being in East Gippsland than living with nature? And so this time I don't feel like we're ready to go ahead with not approving it.
Councillor Van Diggle. Councillor White.
Thank you. I'm not going to support this motion also, because looking at the overheads of where the other dwellings are in close proximity, they obviously were built some time ago, and I would suggest if David was able to build his underground home and his bunker, that his property could well be a safe place of refuge for those close residents who would undoubtedly perish because they have old style homes in the bush. So I'm suggesting that he would be actually building something that was helpful to that community.
Councillor White, thank you. Councillor, any other councillors wish to speak for or against the motion? Councillors, my comment is I will be supporting the officer's recommendation. I can't speak against the advice from the CFA as the main referral agency and the two letters. And I do acknowledge that that David and the proponents have actually responded to the advice from the CFA, and that is that the initial proposal doesn't reach a Bell 40 design, that they are requiring additional column C defendable space and access and water supply, and they've gone back and done their best, and still the CFA have still said that it can't meet the requirements of this type 4 landscape. And we have to focus on the planning matters. And yes, I acknowledge all the complexities around encouraging professionals and children and so on, but this is about a planning matter, and we can't get conflated with those other emotional distractions, unfortunately. And again, having been to Sarsfield at the weekend, and a community that's still recovering from a significant event, I absolutely have to agree with the CFA and err on the side of absolute caution, and the protection of life is absolutely paramount, and the CFA's advice to me is what is most important. Councillor Greason, you have a right of reply. Should you choose to exercise it.
Look, I said before I don't think this is a tough decision. Obviously, it is a tough decision because we're not united in this, David. But I feel that you knew what you were doing when you bought the property, and I feel that you know what is likely to happen in the future. And I think underground houses are fantastic. I live in bush, exactly as Councillor Crook said. So many of us live in the bush, and we wouldn't be able to build now at all. But I really don't think we can support it. Thank you.
Councillor Greason. Councillors, thank you. Councillors, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour of the recommendation? Those against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for being here, David.
Mayor, may I call for a division, please?
You can call for a division.
Thank you.
So, councillors, just for the record, the division is to actually record the names of the councillors who voted which way, and given that the recordings are being live streamed and they are visible, it's an additional way of documenting who voted which way.
Thank you.
So, CEO, we ask for the councillors to vote again, and you will write down their names. Yep, okay. Councillors, all those in favour? Councillor Greason, Reeves, Allen, Crook, Uri. Those against? Councillors White, Buckley, Van Diggle. Let the record show the way the councillors have voted. Councillors, thank you. We will move on back to item 5.1, Assets and Environment. Item 5.1.1, the cycling and walking track between Paynesville and Bairnsdale. And that looks like Fiona on screen.
It is. Mayor, thank you. Councillors, before you is a response to a petition that you may recall receiving on the 30th of September, requesting that Council, excuse me, took appropriate action and looked at progressing safer off-road cycling between Bairnsdale and Paynesville. The report before you tonight outlines the activity that Council is already undertaking and looking at off-road routes, and also identifies the responsibilities of the Department of Transport to manage on-road cycling, as Paynesville Road is a state government road. The report recommends that we write back to the petitioner outlining the actions that we're currently undertaking, which is around investigating safe routes, noting that this report is not to discuss those routes. This will come back to Council as an item for further discussion at a future date, but it is to respond back to the petitioner. With me this evening, I have Wayne Richards, Manager of Community Facilities and Open Space, who is responsible for this area and can take any technical questions.
Thank you, Ms Weigel. Good evening, Mr Richards. Councillors, questions? Councillor Crook. Then Councillor White.
Thank you, Mayor. My question just relates to the state of the current actions being undertaken to review the cycling links. I understand there's some existing pathways, the old Paynesville Road, for example, that could potentially be used, and maybe one of the more significant impediments to the development, or the costly elements to the development of this, will be the Bairnsdale end from sort of Sudding Road type area to connect with the old Paynesville Road. There is in fact a fairly substantial state game reserve managed by Parks Victoria in that vicinity. I wonder, have Parks Victoria actually been approached at this stage, and if not, is that our intention in the future?
Thank you, Councillor Crook. The short answer to that is that the state government hasn't been approached yet. The first step in this process is reviewing the existing work that's been done. Once that review has been done, it'll be presented to council, at which point we can determine whether we proceed any further with it.
Okay, thank you.
Tom, thank you. Councillor White?
My question requires you to take a quantum leap from 11 years ago, where the proposal was looked into, and the figure then was $6.4 million. Have you got the capacity to suggest what that might be now, 11 years later? Because at $6.4 million, that's a huge sum of money in any language, and as I said, that's an 11-year-old.
It was a huge sum in 2011.
It's, yes, a big sum in 2011. So have you got some sort of an idea, Wayne?
Thank you, Councillor White. Yes, we have done a review, and I guess it is dependent on materials and a range of options, but the costs have come back at somewhere between $12 and $18 million for the full trail. But we do note that potentially the trail could be delivered in sections, so that would be broken up depending on how we would split it into sections.
So actually, to compare that to something else that's on the council books, which is the World Centre, a bicycle trail from Paynesville to Bairnsdale will come in very similar to a massive sporting complex that's under construction at the moment. It seems very disproportionate.
Again, Councillor White, I suppose I'll just reiterate that this is I guess a review of an existing document or an existing plan that was done some time ago. So that's our first step. We will, I guess, review what options are available and costings, etc. Once we've got that report finalised.
Thank you. Councillor Crook again.
Thank you. Wayne, would you like to comment on I mean, obviously cost is a key consideration for us, and we're not at a stage yet where we have a final costing. You've indicated that it would be quite a sum. If it were to be based on the existing plans from a decade or so ago, but that's not the only option, is it? Those particular plans. There are in fact other options which may have would reflect different costs to council if they were pursued. Is that right?
That's correct. I guess that's what I meant by my previous response, is that at the moment we're working with a historical document and a historical plan and just sort of ground truthing, I guess, and bringing that up to date. Once we have that information and reviewed that, there would likely be a number of options that could be available.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Crook, thank you. Are there any further questions, councillors? So we're not committing to building it at the moment. We're exploring options, absolutely. Receiving the report. Councillors, if there are no more questions, then there is a recommendation. Do I have a motion? Councillor Crook, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Uri, thank you. Councillor Crook, would you like to speak to the motion?
Briefly, thank you. Look, I think this is potentially a really significant project for council. It links two of our main population centres. Active transport's a priority for us on paper, if not elsewhere. There are a myriad of different options and routes and ways that this development could be undertaken, some of them clearly more expensive than others. And I think it would be premature of the council to start making judgments on a re-evaluation of a plan made some years ago. And I look forward to the report coming back to us, upon which we can make some more informed decisions.
Yeah, very good. Councillor Uri, would you like to speak to the motion?
Sorry, I'm a bit slow.
That's all right.
I think Councillor Crook has summed it up very nicely, but fully supportive of moving this forward. I know, Councillor White, yes, it has been spoken about for a very, very, very long time. So it'd be wonderful if we could progress it now. It would be important for recreation, for tourism and for health and well-being. So I really look forward to it coming back to Council.
Councillor Erie, thank you. Councillor, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? No. In Councillor Greason.
Can I make a statement? I was speaking for the motion, but
Yeah,
I would really like to see similar amount of effort and money put into arts and culture one day.
We can let the record show that that's what you have said, Councillor Greason. I don't know that Lycra is part of culture. Councillor Buckley, would you like to speak for or against the motion? Or not about Lycra?
I'll speak for the motion. However, I'm just curious as to what councillors would think about the vegetation offsets in regards to this, because wouldn't there be quite a few, I would have thought?
We'll take that as a comment rather than in debate.
Thank you.
Councillors, anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? In which case, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thanks, councillors. That's carried unanimously. Let's move along, councillors. We're charging vehicles and setting some fees and charges for them. Item 5.1.2. Fiona, we're back up with you.
Thank you, Mayor. And as you said, yes, this item is looking to set some fees and charges for our newest service, which is electric vehicle charging stations. As council is aware, we're just about to charge up our first 4 charging stations, and we have another 4 coming shortly afterwards. So it's important that we look at what is an appropriate charge for these. As our fees and charges always go through council, normally as part of the budget, but because of this new project, we didn't have the opportunity to put them through the budget last year. We're bringing some proposed charges for our electronic vehicle charging stations so that we can try and ensure that they are up and running in time for Christmas and our busy season where we hope to have lots of visitors to the region, some of whom will be driving these sorts of vehicles. With me this evening, I have Rebecca Lamble, our Sustainability Officer. I think Ms Collins is also in the chamber, who can both adequately and far more adequately than I answer any questions around this matter. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for that. Councillors, are there any questions of officers? Councillor White.
The fee you have written in this document aligns with other councils, but personally, our electricity agreements are coming to an end, and we've just tried to shop around, and the rise is significant right now. Will you be able to have this not set in stone, but set to relate to the rising costs? In other words, in 6 months' time, if it becomes 60 cents, I think we need to charge the proper price. So will you be able to? Will we be able to do that? Change it on the run?
I can take that one.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Through you, Mayor. Yes, this is just a proposal to set the fee at 40 cents for this 6 months, and then annually they can be reviewed. At this point, because there's no public charging stations in East Gippsland at the moment, it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. So when we put some charges in, then we'll be in a position to review how busy they are, and I guess some towns might be more busy than other towns. And I'd just also like to let you know that because we've signed up to a 10-year power purchase agreement, which sources 100% renewable energy, our prices, we're buffered from the increases that have been advertised in the media.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Buckley.
That partially answered my question, because I was just wondering where the electricity came from, whether it was from Loy Yang, which is obviously going to be closed down. So when you say 100% renewable, where exactly is the electricity sourced from? And I've got a supplementary question which I can ask in a moment if you like.
Sure. Rebecca.
Okay.
Our bulk purchasing agreement.
Yes, so it's through a power purchase agreement with other 46 other local governments across Victoria. It's a bit like choosing green power on your electricity bill. It's resulting in new wind farms in Western Victoria, and it's called the Victorian Energy Collaboration. So if you look up VECO, there's more information there.
And how reliable is that when the wind doesn't blow? How is that going to affect the supply for these outlet sources?
It's guaranteed renewable energy, 100%. So.
Okay, and just a question, and this is more of a practical question because a few people have asked me, when the cars pull up and they're locking them in, and how, people are telling me it takes 40 minutes to an hour to be able to charge the car. So if you've got 2 or 3 people waiting in line for those vehicles to be charged, how effective is it really going to be? I mean, it's just a very logical question.
Yep, through you, Mayor. The charges that we are putting in as councillors, we've received federal and state funding. So one charger will feed 2 cars at one time, so they have dual plugs on them. And we have looked at whether or not, when we've designed these charges, future charges can be added if required. There's also other private companies putting in electric vehicle charging stations as well. And on the app that you use, so there's different software, so each company has different software. Where council's going with ChargeFox, which is Australian software, and it has the ability to, when you are charging, you can see if those charging stations are occupied or not. Research has shown that the size of the chargers we're putting in, the average charge time's between 20 and 30 minutes. So it's enough time to go and get a coffee or use the facility. So we've put them in places that are close to shops and close to public toilets.
But if they're being used effectively, you've got to wait perhaps an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, depending on how many people are waiting. And how do you get in line? Like, I'm just intrigued.
No, perhaps I can answer these ones, councillors. Really, we're just trialling these, so it's very hard for us to answer any of these questions at this point in time. We've seen a market for this, we've seen demand for this, and the research is telling us that, more and more people are going to be using electric vehicles, and therefore by not having some of these charging stations in our region was at a disadvantage. But I think, Councillor Buckley, we're going to be more able to answer your questions when we've actually had them in use for a little while, and then we'll be able to review the program.
Very good.
Thank you, Ms Weigel.
Are there any other questions, councillors? Councillor Uri.
Thank you. I don't have a question, but I'm very happy to move the officer's
Terrific.
recommendation.
Thank you. If there aren't any other questions, who would like to second it? Councillor Crook, who feels very disappointed that he didn't have a chance to move it. Councillor Uri, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, just very briefly. I think the setting the fee at 40 cents per kilowatt hour is fine. I've been trying to, I drive an electric car, and I've been trying hard to find out on my app how much I've been paying for it at different stations, and I find it very difficult to work it out. But obviously the best place for me to charge is at home because we've got solar panels. So, but the fact that you've done quite a lot of benchmarking to set that fee, I'm very happy with that, and I think we've got to start somewhere, and I think it would cause less confusion to have the prices the same as other areas. But I just wanted to congratulate the staff on getting to this point. This is so exciting to have these EV chargers across East Gippsland. And Councillor Buckley, I'd love to take you for a drive in my electric car anytime, and we can try a charge station and you can see what happens in the queue, because I haven't had an argument yet, and it's not a problem.
Thank you, Councillor Uri.
Councillor Crook, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just briefly, thank you. I think this is a great initiative, so well done to all those involved. Obviously, it's bolstered by our power purchase agreement, securing us or insulating us from the volatility and the pricing of electricity at the moment. I guess one of the big advantages with electric cars, unlike their fossil fuel relatives, is that you can just charge them at home. So you set off in the morning with a full tank every morning. And so these charges will be used as top-ups on longer journeys, and of course the technology is getting better all the time. But it's not like we need to think about these things and the way we use transport a little bit differently with the advent of electrification of our entire transport network, which is in fact happening pretty quickly. It's different to the petrol model. You don't just drive around until you're empty and then fill up because there's petrol stations everywhere. I'm sure eventually there'll be electric charging stations everywhere, but it will be much more akin to the way we use our mobile phones. We charge them overnight, we get up in the morning, they're fully charged, we use them for the day, we put them back on charge at night when we've finished what we're doing with them. So I think this is great. I look forward to seeing them and using them with the half electric car that I currently have. So thank you.
Councillor Crook. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? No. Councillors, I'll put the motion to the vote then. All those in favour? Thank you, CEO. Carried unanimously. Councillors, we're going to move on to 5.1.3, which is Omeo Holiday Park fees and charges, not electric charges in this case.
Thank you,
Fiona.
Mayor. Not electric charges, but yes, another report around fees and charges. As we've just discussed, fees and charges are normally set when Council adopts the budget at the beginning of every new financial year. As councillors know, we have recently taken over in a very temporary capacity the management of the Omeo Holiday Park for the 22-23 financial year. Therefore, we've had an opportunity to review the fees and charges that were set when we adopted the budget, which was at the same time as we were taking over the park, and have identified that they are perhaps a little high for the service as it currently stands. And some of that is because of some of the damage that was done by the flooding and the removal of some of the cabins. And therefore, we've simplified and lowered the fees to make sure that Omeo has the best opportunity to be attracting visitors over summer and for the remainder of the time that Council is operating the facility. With me this evening, I have Chris Wayne, the manager of our Council Enterprises, who can answer any technical questions about the recommendation. But as you see before you, councillors, the recommendation sets some new fees and charges to be adopted and to become into immediate effect. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, councillors. Are there any questions? It's nice to see a recommendation reducing fees and charges. Questions, councillors? Councillor Buckley.
Yes, thank you. Just in regards to the issue of flooding at the park, which has been, quite substantial and it's hit it a few times. You've said in the report that the park isn't at its highest or not being presented at a high standard. What future works are going to be done in regards to addressing that?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Buckley, and through you, Mayor. The condition of the park, the damage to the grounds with the flooding over time, the park will be rejuvenated and the grounds will have grass growing and be more even and spread out. There was also a lot of damage to the park grounds when the previous tenants bumped out, so there was a lot of damage to the underground electricity supply, etc. There was a lot of sites that we had to pretty much cordon off and not offer for camping to the public. So some of these sites are ideal and probably worth a little bit more money per night than others that are available at the moment. So there's a lot of work that's happened over the last 6 months at the park to bring the standard up, but we still believe there's a little bit more work to do once weather supports some of these rejuvenation works to take place. And I do believe that if people are camping in the park, they are understanding of this, and also understanding that it's going to take a little bit of time for some of the flood damage to be able to be rejuvenated to a standard whereby we could raise the fees to what they were.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wayne.
Thank you. Councillor White.
Just a quick question. The patronage now, has it been rejuvenated? Are we seeing, more people popping in for a stay in Omeo because of I say they're probably limited at the moment, but the fact that we are upgrading at this stage, are we seeing more patronage?
Thank you for the question, Councillor White, and through you again, Mayor. It's difficult for us to comment on patronage against previous years. We didn't have those figures when we took over the park. However, we have had some very satisfied customers and some really great feedback on the condition of the park, and also some of the changes in management styles with council managing the park. So there's been just a few little things we've adopted as far as booking systems, etc. And with that, it's given some of the returning guests some positive feedback to provide to staff. And we do believe that as the park transitions to a new management model, that some of the other services and some of the other assets that could be placed there is just going to enhance it even further. So nothing but positive news up there at the moment.
Thanks, Chris, because right now it's probably in the high country reaching, the peak of attractiveness to actually visit and stay.
Yep. Very good. Councillor Buckley.
It's always attractive up here, John. Look, I'd just like to move the motion, Mayor.
Very good.
If there's
noted,
further questions.
Councillors, any further questions? We have a motion on the table. We have Councillor White willing to second the motion. Did you have another question?
I did, but it's okay.
You sure? We just foreshadowing that it's going to be moved, but if you'd like to ask a question, you can. Okay. Councillor Buckley, go ahead. Would you like to speak to the motion?
I certainly would. I think reducing fees is a good idea. It encourages more people to go to the caravan park, and it's being done on reasonable grounds. Look, we are flourishing up there. I've just been around my area today, and there are push bikes everywhere. They're doing the big 100 circuit. It's a going concern up here. So thank you very much, officers, for your work, and I look forward to seeing further improvements to the park.
Councillor Buckley. Councillor White, would you like to speak to the motion?
Well, only that I've been for some time thinking this was going to be a very good idea for us, because we just have the capacity to do the upgrades where the previous tenants probably were not in a position to do such upgrades. And hopefully, if what Councillor Buckley said about the push bikes everywhere, I hope they've got a carry bag somewhere for the cash, perhaps a saddle bag.
Toothbrush and a credit card is what they ride with these days, John. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Terrific. Let's put the motion to the vote then, councillors. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillors, we're moving out of assets and environment and into the exciting area of business excellence. So item 5.2.1 is the adoption of the updated instrument of delegation council to members of staff. Delegation council to members of staff. I'm not sure if that's exactly how I wanted to read it. Peter, take us away.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you, Mayor. Councillors, before you is a report titled The Adoption of Updated Instrument of Delegation Council to Members of Staff and the Instrument of Appointment and Authorisation, which is seeking a resolution to adopt the delegation from council to members of staff, and also the approval to appoint a new authorised officer under the Planning and Environment Act of 1987. Key points, councillors, the ongoing maintenance of council's delegations occurs through our lawyers, our solicitors, Maddox, and ensures any important changes to legislation that affect council's powers, duties and functions are reflected in the most current delegations. The proposed changes to the instrument of delegation from council to members of staff reflects amendments to legislation officer position titles and inclusion of the Chief Executive Officer as a delegate for all provisions. The reason for this is that the power for Council to delegate the provisions contained within the instrument is conferred specifically through other legislation and cannot be delegated to the CEO under Council's power of delegation through the Local Government Act. Therefore, to ensure that the CEO has the ability to exercise any of the powers, duties, functions contained within the instrument of delegation from Council to members of staff, has the ability, therefore, to exercise powers, duties and functions under that delegation. It's absolutely necessary. In most cases, councillors, you will know that authorised officers are appointed by the CEO through the power of delegation conferred through the Local Government Act 2020. However, the Planning and Environment Act 1987 specifically requires that authorised officers under that Act be appointed by resolution of council and duly sealed. Since the circulation of the agenda, councillors, we have identified a minor error in attachment number 2, which is the instrument of appointment and authorisation. As we had originally intended to present to council on the 13th of December, we brought this forward. The date of the 13th of December is reflected on attachment number 2. So we will make some minor changes to that to reflect today's date if council approves that today. Also tonight with me is Albert Allen, the Manager Governance, who's available to respond to any of the technical questions that you may have.
Mr Cannizzaro, thank
you,
you, Peter. Councillors, are there any questions? A good report, obviously, councillors. Comfortable with that? In which case, councillors, there is a recommendation and there's a mover and a seconder here. Councillor Crook, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Our council has various authorised officers that perform a number of duties and functions for us to undertake our services to the community. This is the process whereby those officers are authorised under the relevant legislation. So I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
No, nothing to add.
Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Thanks, councillors. I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. Carried unanimously. CEO. Councillor, let's move on to item 5.2.3, which is the draft revised investment policy. No, I'm one ahead of myself. Amended risk management policy, 5.2.2. Peter.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. Councillors, before you is a report titled The Amended Risk Management Policy, which is seeking council consideration and adoption of the amended risk management policy. Key points, councillors, for you to consider. This is a regular update that occurs with many of our policies. The revised policy aligns with international standards ISO 31000, 2018, and has, for your information, councillors, has been presented at the Council's Audit and Risk Committee recently. The key proposed changes are the inclusion of reference to the Victorian Government Risk Management Framework and the Governance Institute of Australia Good Governance Guide Risk Management Framework. Also the inclusion of monitoring and reporting requirements on risk outcomes and progress of treatment actions and strategic to the executive team and strategic risks that are considered by the Audit and Risk Committee. Also included is clarity around risk management roles and responsibilities and the alignment of Audit and Risk Committees as outlined in its charter. Also, we've updated references to the Local Government Act 2020 and removal of any of those supporting documents that reference previous Local Government Act 1989. And we've also refined some of the definitions. With me again tonight, Mayor, is Manager Governance Alba Allen and Risk Management Coordinator Cindy Edwards, who's available to respond to any of your technical questions.
Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Uri.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just wondering, I suspect not, but will the changes in this policy result in any changes or needed changes to the audit and risk annual work plan or to the charter, which has just recently been revised, please, Alba?
Very interesting. Thank you, Councillor Uri.
Thank you, Councillor Uri, and through you, Mayor, my understanding is no.
Good. Thank you, Alba.
It's a very binary answer. Thank you very much. Councillors, are there any further questions? Councillors, there is a recommendation. Do we have a motion? Councillor Uri, that was not you. You can if you like. You're flashing away there. Councillor...
I'm having trouble controlling that hand, Mayor. I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Are you happy to then second it, Councillor Greason? Terrific. Councillor Uri, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Councillor Greason? Would anybody else... Is the motion opposed, councillors? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Let's put the motion to the vote then, councillors. All those in favour? Thanks, councillors. Carried unanimously. CEO. Draft revised investment policy 5.2.3, councillors. We are now at that spot that I was at before.
Thank you,
Peter.
Mayor, and through you. Councillors, before you is a report titled the Revised Investment Policy 2022, which is seeking the adoption of that revised investment policy. Key points, councillors, for your consideration. Some minor administrative changes have been made to the policy, including removal of some of the supporting operational guidelines, which are now contained within a separate internal document outside of the policy. And also the policy has also been updated to include a statement regarding ethical investments. Councillors, before you, with me tonight is Manager Finance, Liz Collins, who's available to respond to any technical questions you may have.
Indeed. Councillors, are there any questions? Thank you, councillors. In which case there is a recommendation. Do I have a motion, councillors? Councillor Greason and Councillor Uri. Great. So, Councillor Greason, would you like to speak to the motion? Councillor Uri?
Just briefly to say that I think the inclusion of this extra clause is important and significant. I think a lot of organisations are beginning to look at their supply chains, for example, now. I think that though there was some discussion, a little bit of discussion about how we could possibly do that, I'm not sure that at this particular point in time it is a viable option for council to do. There are some measures already in place, but to investigate very thoroughly what any issues in a supply chain, I think, is quite difficult. However, to strive for to be an ethical organisation and to align with our strategies in everything that we do makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm very happy to recommend this this motion to other councillors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Uri. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? I see no one. Councillors, in which case I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. Carried unanimously. We are now on to next year's meeting schedule, councillors, 5.2.4. Thanks, Liz. So we've seen this before, councillors, but Mr Cannizzaro, would you like to lead us on the charge?
Yes, happy to introduce it. Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, before you is a report titled Council Meeting Schedule 2023, seeking adoption thereof. And councillors, no doubt, have had a lot of input in the construction of this council meeting schedule. Key points for your consideration tonight, councillors, is that the meeting schedule proposed for 2023 has been prepared to enable council to effectively carry out its decision-making functions through the next year. In line with Governance Rule 4.1 subsection 1, at or before the last meeting of each calendar year, Council must fix the date, time and place of all Council meetings and any delegated committee meetings for the following calendar year, and hence the report before you tonight. Also of note, councillors, that Council has conducted in the past Council meetings as part of its Counselling Community initiative. One of the main differences with this proposed Council meeting schedule for 2023 is that all Council meetings will be held in the Bairnsdale chambers, which will enable more time for community engagement during the Counselling Community visits, which we anticipate will continue to happen. So with me tonight, councillors, is Albert Alling, Manager Governance, who can answer any of your technical questions.
Thank you, Mr Canizzaro. Councillors, any questions? We certainly have done this one a couple of times. So, councillors, there is a recommendation. Do we have a motion? Councillor Allen. Councillor Van Diggle. Councillor Allen, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. Only that it's, nice to see in the middle of it all, well, there's a bit of a hiatus between the 27th of June and the 25th of July, and I'm not counting the days much. So I have no hesitation in moving the motion.
You've got your holiday calendar marked off already. Councillor Van Diggle, would you like to speak to the motion?
We have Christmas holidays first, so don't wish the time away. But I mean, there's not much to say except for that I think we tried the community visits last year and we had very little participation. So I think it's still important that we attend communities, but obviously it hasn't proven to be the most effective use of our funds to run meetings. So I'm very happy with the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Councillor Buckley, would you like to speak against the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Look, I have, maybe I'm a traditionalist, but I believe that the general meeting should be held monthly, and which I've stated in our discussions in briefings. And I also am concerned, although, however, we may have found some ground here, I suppose I'm seeking clarification on that, but that we have very long days when we have very important decisions to be made in our general meetings because they come off the back of a briefing, which traditionally sometimes that can add for some of us, at 10 to 12 to 14 hour days, depending on whether we've got to travel, which I think is an OH&S issue. But I think we've dealt with that perhaps in this scheduling. So I'm seeking a little bit of clarification. I should have done that during questioning and I do apologise. But I cannot support the motion on the grounds that I've just aforementioned.
Councillor Buckley. Councillors, would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Allen, you have a right of reply. Would you like to exercise it?
Only to say that if we go to monthly meetings, then the days are going to get longer because we've got more to business to process. And every 3 weeks we seem to have a pretty full agenda as it is. So if you want less time, maybe we have to go to every 2 weeks, and I don't know that that's an option.
No. Councillor Allen. Councillors, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. In terms of place and community, we have dealt with that matter, Mr McConnell. We are now going to move through urgent and other business, and there isn't any urgent or other business, but I do need a motion that we close the meeting to the public in accordance with provisions section 66(2) of the Local Government Act 2022 to consider the following list of items which will be considered confidential. Councillor Allen, do I have a seconder? Councillor Van Diggle, would you like to speak to the motion? Councillor Van Diggle, is the motion opposed? It doesn't seem to be. Councillors, I'll put the motion to the vote. We're going into confidentiality. All those in favour? Thank you. Carried unanimously. See you. you. Go. So, councillors, it is 8:57. I'm just going to declare the meeting closed of the 29th of the 11th, 2022. Once again, councillors, thank you for your considered decision-making tonight. There were some tough decisions tonight, and I think everybody appreciates the thought and concern you put to those decisions. And can I say to the officers again, thank you for providing excellent reports that enable councillors to make good